Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So I thought I would do a video on the kind of entrepreneurial side. I haven't done too many of these in a while. I get this question on how to handle business taxes and cash flow. So I thought I'd give you my thoughts on that. So I'll read you the question here. It says, anyway, I know you're not an accountant or anything like that, but I do know that you have experience with a number of different revenue streams. And my questions are regarding how to track and keep everything squared away. I quit my full-time job back in September to start down the path of being an author. A few months in, I realized I was going to need more than just to keep me afloat financially. So I started an independent consulting company, and I'm doing that work in addition to Pluralsight videos. I use QuickBooks to track everything, and I set up a new bank account for my business to keep those transactions separate from my personal transactions. The kicker, though, is that I've been contracted with Pluralsight as me, I'm not going to put his name, and not my consulting business. And any development work I do is contracted under my business name. So on paper, they seem like separate pursuits, but in the end, it's just me and only me doing both jobs. Let me make sure I understand that here. So he says, so he's contracted with Pluralsight and not the consulting business. So, okay. Being that my company is a single member LLC, would you recommend just combining and tracking all of my income from Pluralsight and consulting work under the same books/bank account, since I have to pay taxes against my social security number anyway, or keep them separate? So would I recommend combining and tracking all of the income from Pluralsight and consulting work under the same? Okay. I guess what I'm looking for is, do you keep your Pluralsight income separate from your simple programmer income, or are they tracked together? Okay, so a couple of things here. So again, here's the standard caveat. I'm not a lawyer or an accountant. This is not legal advice. Not legal advice. So anyway, here's the thing. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of issues here. So I mean, this is going to be a little bit U.S. centric, but it probably applies to other countries as well. The primary thing, the reason why we set up separate companies and when we do business is two reasons, and they kind of vary. So one reason why I do it, at least, is because of liability, right? I don't want to have someone who sued me in my business pursuits have access to my personal assets. If I'm doing business as myself and I get sued, that's me getting sued, not the business. And so all of my assets, including real estate, whatever I have in my bank account, everything is up for grabs. That's probably not a great situation, okay? Also, from a tax situation, the second reason is that a lot of people will form an LLC, aside from the LLB, just to keep things separate. So that's good, just so you can so you can have a balance sheet, so you can know how your business is doing. You don't want to intermix those funds, right? So and you need to do that for liability reasons. So you might have an LLC. Now, I personally file an LLC as an S-Corp, and a lot of entrepreneurs do that. And the reason why they do that is so that they can pay themselves as an employee a reasonable wage, which you have to define what that is. I'm not going to get into it because a lot of accountants and tax professionals have different definitions of what it is. And there's certain risks in depending on how much you pay yourself. But essentially, if you make enough money, and it's probably going to be like over 100,000, probably closer to the 150,000 mark. If you're making over that amount from your business, then the thing is, you'll probably have a tax advantaged situation if instead of you just taking that money just as an LLC, just an LLC that's a regular LLC is a pass-through entity. So you basically, it's just ordinary income for you, right? And you're going to get taxed on self-employment taxes on that income. But if you can file as an S-Corp, and then you pay yourself a salary, right? And then you take distributions from that S-Corp, those distributions are not taxed as self-employment income. They're taxed as an investment income, essentially. So it's not capital gains, but it is not ordinary working income. It's not subject to self-employment tax, if that makes sense to you. Again, not legal advice, I'm not an accountant, blah, 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 but this is my understanding of it, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so that's where that part makes sense. Now, as far as, let's get into a few technicalities here. As far as Pluralsight, you can just ask them to change the contract and assign the contract to your company or your LLC. In fact, even if it's reported to you as income, you can, I mean, talk to your accountant, but I think that that doesn't really matter. You can still put it into the LLC's bank account and say that you're just accepting the payment, but it's actually for this company that's doing the service. I don't think it so much matters on the, you know what I mean? I think there's ways around that, but I had my Pluralsight contracts formally assigned to my company. I will tell you, if you go from an S Corp to another S Corp, you have to watch out. Once you put a contract or an asset into an S Corp, it's very difficult to get it out. I learned that the hard way. You should definitely pay attention to that. So does that make sense? That's why you would split things up in general for, you know, for having your personal income. You don't want to do business as yourself, at least have an LLC. And if you need to, because you're making enough money and you're paying a lot of self-employment tax and you're trying to be tax advantaged as possible, and you have to run the calculator, you have to talk to your accountant, because there's a lot of caveats to this. For example, if you're making a regular wage from a regular job, you may have already maxed out your OSDI and Medicare contributions, and you got to look at your tax brackets and stuff. But you can run the calculation, you can see if you can save money by having an S Corp. Now you have to file an S Corp, and you know, there's some money, some costs there and whatnot as well. But that's kind of what you would think about, and you'd have your own separate bank account for that in QuickBooks. Now, what am I doing specifically with Simple Programmer, just so you know? So I originally just had Simple Programmer, and Simple Programmer was an LLC that I filed as an S Corp that I pay myself a salary from, and I did everything under there, the website, everything, and Pluralsight royalties came in there, my book royalties came in there. Recently, what I've done is I've moved it out for a couple of reasons. One, because there's really multiple businesses here. So there's my personal stuff, right, which is separate. There is, which includes my real estate. I've got my real estate kind of in the personal. That's sort of together, but all my real estate is in separate LLCs. They're not S Corps, okay? The next thing that I have is I have the Simple Programmer, and I have a business partner in that, Josh, who does a lot of the marketing, which I've mentioned here. He's, at least we've got a vesting schedule for him to become a full partner, and so I want to keep the Simple Programmer website and those assets separate. I don't want to give him half of my Pluralsight royalties and book royalties. No offense, I like Josh, but I don't want to give him that much money. You know, I want the deal is for the Simple Programmer stuff. So I have created another S Corp, and I have split out the Pluralsight royalties, the book royalties, any consulting fees that I do, speaking fees, contracting, things like that are not directly related to the Simple Programmer business. So Simple Programmer business has its own QuickBooks account, you know, it's its own separate entity, right, in its own operating agreement and all that stuff. And then my new business, my other business, it has my Pluralsight royalties, all the other kind of stuff that I'm doing as a independent. It's like my self-employed, like consulting type of business, and I'm an employee of Simple Programmer. So that's how I have it set up, right? Let me make sure I answered all your questions here. I think I have here, let me see, would you recommend combining and tracking all income? So, you know, I don't know. I mean, if you're just a single member LLC and you're not doing the S Corp, just the simplest thing you should always do the simplest thing that you can do as possible without painting yourself into a corner. So in the case, in this particular case, I think it makes sense to just try to assign the contract to the LLC if possible, the rights, and just have a single member LLC. And if you don't need to do an S Corp, don't do an S Corp, and just have separate bank account and just keep the assets separate just for liability reasons and accounting perspective, right? If you need to divide things out, if you take on partnerships, if you're starting another business or something like that, then maybe you can think about those things. Or if it's more tax advantage to have an S Corp, then you can start thinking about those things. But I would keep it as simple as possible, as long as possible, because you don't want to get tied up into all of this messy stuff. And there's a lot to learn about this, but start simple. Don't make things more complicated than they need to be. So anyway, I hope that answers your question and fills in for some of you that are wondering how I run this and how I've got things set up. I'm not an expert on this. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I feel like I've got things set up at least ideal for now. And maybe there's better ways. Maybe there's, you know, other things that I could be doing, but it works for now. It appears to work, and you know, I still pay a lot of taxes, but hey, I think I've minimized them to a reasonable degree. I'm sure there's always better ways, but it makes sense. Sometimes you just gotta, you gotta not spend so much time on this administrative stuff, as little bit as you can, but make sure that you're covered from a liability perspective and you don't do stupid things, and then move on and actually make money. And that's, a lot of times making money solves your problems, because then you can hire lawyers and accountants and stuff to figure out the stuff for you. So focus on making money. Just don't screw yourself, don't put yourself in a corner. Anyway, I hope you like this video. If this is helpful to you, even if it's not, you just want to see me talk on camera, click subscribe below. I do about 2 to 3 videos a day, and I appreciate any thumbs up, shares, anything like that. And I will talk to you next time. Take care.